Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our monthly webinars. And we welcome you on board with this very interesting subject today. We're touching on a very important aspect of our lives, which is mobility. And in that respect, when we talk of mobility, we are looking at what makes people move from one area to another. And today we are happy to have very good panelists who have a lot of work, have done a lot of work in that area, and have very good perspectives that will address some of the aspects that make the subject or make the sector a very interesting sector. When we are looking at the sector, we need to recall what it does in terms of allowing people to move from one place to another, while at the same time, it is the one that allows for goods and services to also be moved from one point to another. Dan, you can put on the working document, the presentation. So one of the things that we shall be looking at is the status of this sector within the African continent and its prospects for improving in terms of becoming more readily affordable within the sector, the continent. How does the continent stand in terms of industrialization, for example, in terms of the manufacture of motor vehicles, is one of the concerns that is driving most of the policymakers in the continent in that direction.
Reuben, is it possible that you're muted? because I cannot hear anything.
Oh, sorry.
Ah, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, so when we are looking at the sector, you find it is actually one of the sectors that is underdeveloped currently, and therefore it's important that it is addressed, the constraints are addressed in order for us to achieve the continental goals for industrialization as well as development. Now, the automotive sector does not come on its own. By the time you are manufacturing a motor vehicle, there are quite a number of sectors that you will find are involved. Upstream, you'll find that there is mining that needs to be done. Then there's the development of steel industries and other metals that are used in fabrication of the various components of the motor vehicles. Then there's the aspect of fuels, ensuring that you're able to refine and get the right quality of the fuels that move these vehicles. And if you're able to also look at the other components like rubber, plastic, leather, cotton that are used, and then the electronics, bearing in mind that most of the current motor vehicles have a lot of integrated electronics that make them move. Then when you look at the core component of the vehicles, you have the original equipment manufacturers. If you're looking at things like the engines, you're looking at gearboxes, you're looking at the propellants and all that. So those are some of the things that you find are manufactured as the core part of the vehicles. Then you're looking at the downstream sectors that are involved. You have the financial insurance, you have the aftermarket services and auto parts, then you have car hires and rentals, fuel supply, advertising, transportation, warehousing, and other adjacent industries. Finance, for example, you have legal aspects and such. So it's an industry that catalyzes a lot of development and a lot of research that goes into the vehicles. Currently, when you're looking at the continental motorization index, you'll be surprised that of all the continents, obviously, we have the lowest motorization levels. And looking at the figures of 2018, we had, out of 1,000, we had about 40 people being able to have a motor vehicle. And that's a very low figure. When you compare that with most of the regions in the continent, perhaps India beats us slightly, but that's a country. And when you are looking at the highest, of course, you find countries like the United States has a very high level. And if you're looking at also other countries like Western Europe, those are quite high. So that signifies to you that there is a lot of improvement or growth that is expected within the continent. And thanks to the growing population, incomes before the COVID pandemic, we had a robust growth happening in the continent. And that was a factor that was being looked at, that by 2030 we shall be requiring about 10 million passenger vehicles per year. So this is an area of growth. When you're looking at the development, of course, you find quite a few countries have shown aspects of development, but there is a lot of scope for development. And these are the things that we shall be looking at, how productivity can be improved, how motorization can be improved, and what are the prospects for such things to happen. So for today's presentations, we have our first presenter who will be giving us a presentation that is geared towards aspects of standardization. And this is Ms. Nadine Umutoni, who works at ARSO as Monitoring and Evaluation Officer. She holds a bachelor's degree and is an East African quality champion. She has contributed to drafting numerous ARSO continental standardization and conformity assessment policy documents which guide the implementation of ARSO's mandate, and also as a resource mobilization person. She has contributed significantly to the achievement of the PACI or Pan-African Quality Infrastructure objectives, and is involved in periodical reviews of the quality infrastructure, technical barriers to trade, and sanitary and phytosanitary aspect in the continent. And Nadine, we welcome you for the first presentation, which we'll be looking at the leveraging of the quality infrastructure in terms of Africa's domestic production of for local job creation, safe, sustainable, climate-friendly mobility. So welcome and for your first, as your first presenters. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator, technical director. I'm Nadine Mutoni. Without delaying, I can just share my screen. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to present on leveraging the potential of automotive industry in Africa, and I will talk briefly on the background of the industry and go through the domestic production for local job creation, and straight to the strategic role of standardization and conformity assessment, the needs for application of harmonization of standards, then conclusion. I am sure you have, most of you have seen this picture before. This is during the meeting that was held in January 1977 in Ghana, when the Organization of African Unity, together with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, were forming ARSO as an intergovernmental organization mandated to promote standardization and conformity assessment in Africa. So since then, ARSO facilitates intra-Africa trade and global trade through provision of harmonized standards and conformity assessment. So the African automotive industry is underdeveloped if we compare with the other regions on the world, such as Europe, Asia, and North America. And this gives an opportunity for growth across the entire value chain, from upstream to downstream activities, as has just presented Mr. Ruben. The vehicle is sold in Africa, mainly imported. Researchers have shown that Africa imports 4 times than the number it produces. And the automotive production rate is still low, meaning 0.9% compared to the global production. Countries that have developed their automotive industry in Africa, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, and Morocco, who produce and sell a large number of vehicles. If we take the data of 2015, they sold 80% of the total number of new vehicles that were sold on the continent. On the same note, second-hand vehicles, used vehicles, dominate the retail market, with Nigeria on the top of importing used vehicles. So now, as the continent is moving to the development of electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, there is a challenge of limited infrastructure to support the development of these technologies. Apart from the technology challenge, we have an unemployment rate which is very high in Africa. In 2022, it stood at 80%, and we have South Africa, which has the highest rate, which is 34%. We again have insufficient automotive industry standards, which now ARSO is working on this issue. We see it in the next slide, we again have a low rate of African motorization per inhabitant, which is 44 vehicles per 1,000 inhabitants compared to the other region. Africa is the one which is behind. Now on the domestic production, we have seen that there is the Africa is undeveloped, but this situation is due to low average income, if I can say, and the lack of considerable middle income population. And in addition to this, there is also a lending rate in this sector, which is high, and it makes ownership of a car restricted to only wealthy and prosperous people. So this situation makes Africa a small market for the automotive industry, hence the less manufacturing capacity and capability. So the dream of the large-scale automobile production in Africa will be a reality when the government and the industry work together to reduce the unemployment, of course, and by creating jobs for youth, especially in the technology part of the industry. They will also, this synergy will also boost industrialization capacity by providing infrastructure, necessary infrastructure to investors. In this, in some countries, we have seen that governments are the major drivers of the development of this sector. We can take, for instance, in Ethiopia, the investors are given some incentive where, for example, on condition, they are given tax exemption of 50% if they tax exemption if they export 50% of their products, and also if they supply more than 70% of the products to an exporter as a production input. So this is an incentive that can also increase the investment in this sector. We have noted that Africa has a growing youth rate. According to the UN, Africa has the youngest population with 70% in the sub-Saharan, only in the sub-Saharan Africa. So this is a big opportunity for Africa's growth, not only for this industry, but for all the industries. Now on the strategic role of standardization, conformity assessment, we have some political willingness in Africa in this. We can just highlight some of the high-level strategic initiatives that support the development of the automotive industry, such as the different various AU decisions on, we can just mention the very recent on the mobilization of a facility for the development of the AFCFTA automotive funds. This fund will come to facilitate, to support the AFCFTA strategy for the African automotive manufacturing sector. We again have the Afreximbank automotive strategy, which has been implemented, and we have concluded a project on standard harmonization for the automotive sector. This was supported by Afreximbank, still under this strategy. We have REX initiatives. We can just mention a few, such as the Tripartite Transport and Transit Facilitation Program. And under this program, there is also a cooperation between this program and ARSO in standard harmonization, of course, and implementation. we have the Association of Automotive Manufacturers, which involve governments in new automotive manufacturing development programs. We will have, I think we will have someone from the AAAM. And again, finally, we have the ARSO, African Organization for Standardization Technical Committee that work on harmonization of automotive standards under its under automotive technology and engineering conformity assessment scopes. So why do we need standards? Now, harmonization of standards, for instance, let's say for fuel, is paramount, and we can see that the benefits for this include the regulation, if we say regulation, we mean that once the African countries have adopted or have domesticated the standards, the harmonized standards, meaning that their regulations are harmonized in a way. So we again know that once African standard, even the international standard are applied, we have safe vehicles, and we will have safe and safe parts, automobile parts, and also it will increase the manufacturing capability, and we reduce imported used vehicles. Again, we will have we will gain access to the targeted market, and also safe delivery of products to consumers, while alleviating costly penalties and fines, and necessary fines. Okay, now we're going to the harmonization of standards. We are having at ARSO level a committee, as I've just said, a committee dealing with standards on automotive technology and engineering. This technical committee brings together members from experts from 16 ARSO member states, plus an observer, which is Zanzibar, and also the RECs that are part of the TFP. This is EAC, SADC, and COMESA. We have a leadership of this committee, which is Kenya. And by developing these standards, we always refer and source our documents from international standardization bodies and regional economic communities, other continental standardization bodies, and also other partners. We even refer to foreign standards, technical literatures, and other research findings to form a content that is fit for Africa. So far, we have published 41 standards. In this 41, out of these 41 standards, we have 13 that we call unique standards, unique products for Africa. And we have again adopted the international standards, 28 international standards, which include UNIS regulations and other international standards that members are recommended to adopt to unlock trade barriers. So after this was a project financed by Afrexim Bank, as I said, and currently we are creating awareness so that member states can adopt these standards to facilitate their trade under the AFCFTA. We have again partnered with PTB to continue the development of standards.
3 minutes. Why not?
Yeah,
3 minutes.
yeah, I'm done. And now we will have other standards in the next year. 28 standards will be published. So thanks to our partners AUCF, CFTF, Exim Bank, Park Institutions, and PTB. So this is how the standards look like. And now this is the products we have once we have complied with standards. These are the products made in Africa. There are some from Nigeria, South Africa, Morocco, Ghana, Kenya, Tunisia, and Uganda. So in conclusion, we should continue educating the public, all the stakeholders involved in the sectors, and also creating awareness and continue capacity building activities in order to implement the provision of the AFCFTA agreement. Also, we continue harmonizing standards as well as promote the use of the standards in the technical regulation to unlock trade barriers. Thank you very much. This was my presentation. I submit, Chair. Thank you. Hello, Technical Director.
Yeah, some of the few questions that we might wish to ask here include what are the current regulatory issues in the African automotive industry? For example, what would be the benefits of the harmonized standards and conformity assessment in the promotion of effective automotive value chains in the continent? If you can just give us some highlights on those aspects.
Thank you very much. Issues associated to the regulatory framework, many in Africa, but some countries have tried to reduce them and regulate the automotive industry, which has reduced the penetration of, for example, gray imports. But now there are still some challenges, such as the lack of the harmonized regulatory framework that can guide and facilitate all member states to trade among them. But there are some initiatives that are current to establish a continental regulatory framework. We will share the results after this one has approved, but it is still under discussion. We also have some overlapping membership to various regs and customs acts and protocols, which make compliance almost impossible. We have some tariffs and other tax challenges. This affects the export and imports of safe products, and also obsolete regulations, meaning that some regulations are not based on scientific facts or harmonized standards. Then the benefits of harmonized standards, there are many. We know that the standards improve the well-being and the welfare of the population in general, but manufacturers, the standards help also manufacturers to reduce costs and anticipate technical requirements, and also increase innovation and production. So in this sector, for example, the standard help automotive manufacturers to meet regulatory approvals in the markets, and also is communication with the global stakeholders. When they talk the same language, they can trade easily. They also, with the real trade under the FCFTA, there is need to adopt and to continue harmonizing standards as stipulated by the FCFTA Annex 6 on technical barriers to trade. And finally, the standards if the technical content of the standards can help and assist in reducing so many issues such as carbon emission and environmental related issues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nadine. We shall be coming back to you maybe in a short while so that we can also get more from you. So keep yourself around so that you may answer some of the questions which will arise from our participants. Our next presenter, I don't know, you're able to project? Our next presenter is Anya Slan. He's an Economic Affairs Officer with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. And she is an Economic Affairs Officer in the African section division for Africa, the list developed countries and special programs. Prior to joining UNCTAD, she worked as an economic advisor for the consultants company and has working experience with the World Bank and Economic Commission for Africa. She holds a PhD in international economics from Ruhr University, Bochum, where she specialized in trade and regional value chains research in developing countries. Today, she will present to us on the African industrialization, the case for an African automotive industry's opportunities and potentials and challenges for industrialization, the role of UNCTAD. And it's, in our view, looking from the outside point of view, to see what are the potentials and what are the challenges that we are facing so that we can exploit the full potential of this. Welcome, Dr. Slani, for your presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. So I will just share my screen. And let me maybe also highlight that I am not an expert in the automotive industry, but at UNCTAD, we are engaged in research and also in technical assistance, productive capacity building in order to promote export diversification and industrialization of African countries. And so this intervention, my presentation is really largely based on these findings from previous reports where we looked at for instance, export diversification potential, and then also, for instance, the role of the AFCFTA in inclusive growth and industrialization. So thanks a lot for the invitation, and the presentation will be rather brief, and then I can highlight some other aspects and discuss a bit more after. So as mentioned, this intervention is based on previous reports, and so for instance, in the Economic Development in Africa Report 2021, entitled Reaping the Potential Benefits of the AFCFTA for Inclusive Growth, we look at how the African continental free trade area can actually contribute to industrialization, but also especially to inclusive growth, so growth that is both poverty and inequality reducing, and that also includes a higher participation of women and youth. And so, I mean, what we've seen is that growth has been inclusive, so growth growth that is poverty and inequality reducing in only 17 out of 49 African countries between 20 and 2022. And so in the report, we then look at the potential of the AFCFTA, and we collaborate with the International Trade Center to estimate the untapped export potential of intra-African trade. And so we find that it's estimated at $21.9 billion. And so when I discuss some of the findings, you will see why the automotive sector is actually an important sector. And so then we highlight in the report that strengthening regional trade integration through the AFCFTA can really help enhance inclusive development and industrialization. And we'll see what the role of the automotive industry is here. Then in the recently published report, the EDA 2022, we look at export diversification potential. We look at also trends in export diversification, and we explore potential new avenues that can strengthen forward and backward linkages and also sectoral linkages to financial services. So this report was really not focused on industrialization, but rather on the export diversification potential. And it highlights the importance of services, actually, which is also something I want to highlight in the presentation. And so with regards to our estimation of untapped intra-African trade potential, we find that the vehicle sector is the sector with the largest untapped potential. And although I don't want to go into the details of the whole computation, just want to mention that the export potential indicator is developed by ITC. So we collaborated with ITC, and it estimates the potential value of exports for a given exporter-importer product combination. And so this untapped is for the moment based on the current tariff conditions. So it does not yet take into account the AFCFTA. And so what we found is that in untapped export potential in the vehicle sector is around 1.4 billion. And so this is where 1/3 of that untapped potential could be realized through tackling costly non-tariff measures, regional infrastructure gaps, and also inadequate market information. So it's based on this matching and where the potential is estimated, and then the actual exports are compared. And so this is the gap where we say there's an untapped export potential. And this also then brings us to the challenges for increasing trade in vehicles and building productive capacities. And then the other part of the untapped potential is actually a dynamic export potential, where we also used growth estimates and estimates of population growth and how this might unlock future export growth. It was over the next 5 years, so then until 2026. And there also the vehicle sector, because also of the high elasticities, was also an important sector. And what was important, we also looked then at the potential of all sectors on the potential for driving industrialization and structural change. So we looked at the share of processed goods in that sector. And then we also looked at participation of women to see how inclusive is the sector, what could be the benefits for inclusive growth when this sector will grow under the AFCFTA. And then in particular, under the AFCFTA, we looked at the additional trade potential that could be unlocked through tariff liberalization. And there, again, the vehicle sector really stands out and could experience by far the largest gains of around 2 billion. And so this is where we see that because of some of the current tariffs, which are really, they range, and for instance, the trade-weighted intra-African tariff is 3.3%, but through tariff liberalization, there's an additional potential of exports. And then we discuss the challenges that actually come to exploit this export potential. And so one is that is highly discussed for the sector are the rules of origin. So this is kind of the passport of a product, and when this rules of origin are very strict, then they might actually hinder the access to inputs in the regional market, and they might also hinder then creating productive capacities. And so it really depends on where the country stands. And for some countries, they might need a longer adjustment time for developing productive capacities. And then also for the import of used cars, this is also one of the challenges where we highlight that there should be maybe the potential under the AFCFTA to have harmonized regulation and harmonizing maximum age and technical requirements on imports of used cars. And so why we think it's an important sector is, I mean, there has been a lot of dynamics recently, and exports, this is what Robin already mentioned in your introduction, that there has been a declining trade deficit actually over the last years. And then also we see, based on greenfield project data, that investments increased from 2.7 billion in 2016 to 4.0 billion in 2019. However, something we highlight in the reports and also in our research, currently the production is concentrated in only a few countries. And we know that it's concentrated in Morocco and South Africa, which together accounted for roughly 93% of vehicles produced in 2019, followed by Algeria and in Egypt. And although there are emerging production, it's often limited to small scale operations. And so we then also look at the export potential of these other countries, and we see, or we confirm, that actually only 21 African countries show to have some export potential in the vehicle sector. And of these 21 African countries, only 8 countries are least developed countries. And then another aspect where we are cautious, or where we need to be cautious, where we need to see how inclusive the sector actually is we see a low share of women-owned enterprises in that sector, and based off enterprise surveys, it's only 1.1%. And I'm going to be brief, but we can discuss that later. I think this is something has been highlighted a lot, that the sector is important to strengthen regional value chains, and because of because the sector is really characterized by strong backward and forward linkages, it can be a central sector for industrialization. And this is then what we looked at. So we tried to see, okay, what's the potential of increasing the vehicles production, for instance, in South Africa and Morocco, but then what is the potential of the backward and forward linkages? And actually what we see then also African countries, intra-African export potential for intermediate inputs to South Africa, Morocco, and also Ghana we looked at, totals around 315 million. And so this includes electrical machinery, iron and steel, plastics and rubber, which are main inputs to the vehicles production. But still, even there, we see that some of this additional export potential would be rather concentrated in just a few countries. And something we highlight in terms of, okay, what needs to be done is only one part, or only one example is that high knowledge intensive services are an important input and provide suitable linkages between suppliers and users in various stages of the value chain. And so then in our report, we also look at additional challenges, and there I'm happy to discuss a bit more about the potential of the sector and the challenges. I stop here. Thank you. I'm taking a bit more time than I thought, but yeah, it's a interesting topic. So I stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think a very interesting perspective. In your view, if you look at it from your studies, what would be the challenge, for example, if or what makes it impossible for some countries to import, say, a vehicle from South Africa to Kenya or to Zambia or to Malawi? What are the key challenges at the moment that would make it impossible for South Africa to plan, to produce, to fill into the markets of these countries?
Yeah, so when we particularly look at what are import restrictions or what are the barriers to import, I mean, there are some kind of trade-related barriers, but then there are also some barriers in terms of price and quality matches. So I mean, for instance, when we see that there's still a large share is actually imports of used cars, then it's still somehow a barrier that although we have a rising income and rising middle class, that for some it's still cheaper to import a used car. And then, I mean, this is hampering production on the continent, of course. But this is only one aspect. We also have still face trade barriers. So it's the tariffs are actually, I mean, there are wide discrepancies in tariff rates. Although the trade weighted average is only at 3%, it ranges up to, I think we had an example that let me just briefly check, for instance, in Nigeria, we had a trade weighted average tariff of 17% of vehicle imports. And also in Kenya, we saw a trade weighted average of 12%. So of course, with such high tariff rates on imports, the demand, the intra-African demand will be reduced. And this is the potential of the AFCFTA by reducing tariff rates. And although, I mean, we know LDCs, they have 10 years for liberalization, but still this could really show this large potential. Something where we, when we look at the tariff schedules, and then I need to check, like in the latest tariff schedules, there might be some sensitive product groups within the vehicle sector, which of course then would reduce the whole potential. But of course, it's also it's a sensible kind of sector for production. So there are some tariffs will remain. And then what I also mentioned, but this is when we talk maybe about the standards, and then also the information on what we've seen. It's some part of market information that's often missing or not sufficiently provided. So where can inputs be sourced from? And this is something where we then also try to go a bit more into detail in terms of these, for instance, what we have, the African Trade Observatory, how this can provide market information. And something else in the terms of standards and quality, why imports maybe are reduced. Although this is rather on the producer side, when we look at certification of some standards. So maybe sometimes import are restricted because some standards or some certificates are not, cannot be sufficiently proven, or there's a barrier to import. So, I mean, this is just a few aspects for these import restrictions or barriers to import.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think these are some of the aspects that make some of the developments in the continent very, complicated in terms of, yes, we do need to improve the conditions for manufacturing, certain essential things like automotive, the vehicles that are used to improve mobility, to export our goods, to get things from the rural areas to urban centers, to get people moving around. But then you find that we go ahead and put a lot of, barriers in terms of, the tariffs, some very complicated rules of origin and everything else that then it ties down everything. I mean, you find that the sector is not moving forward. I think as we move forward, we think about what kind of advice you'll be giving to the African countries so that this sector is released, is unleashed, as they say, so that it can really, catalyze the rest of the sectors to grow. Because if you look at the upstream, downstream, linkages, you find that there are so many things that can go right if the sector is flourishing. But currently you find it is subdued, and you wonder what. I mean, it's like buying a vehicle, owning a vehicle is a real big challenge for anybody, and it's like a punishment. So that's something that we really need to look at and advise countries in Africa that this sector needs to be allowed to grow so that it can catalyze the rest of the continent, the sectors to also grow. So think about it as we move forward, and we come back to you for further clarifications. Thank you very much. Let me now welcome our colleague. This is from the USA, Ravinda Choda. Welcome. You will be giving a presentation on the contribution of the automotive industry to the economy of the United States and lessons for Africa in fulfilling Africa's vision for large-scale automobile production on the continent, with regards to the role of the private sector and standardization in facilitating growth. Ravinda Shodha, kindly, Mr. Dan, you need the profile. So Ravinda Choda has over 30 years of experience in regulatory and standards development, having worked at various organizations such as the British Standards Institute, General Electric, the European Space Agency, and the International Motorcycle Manufacturers Association. Currently working with the United Nations Working Party 29, informal working group for safer and cleaner used and new vehicles, looking into the importation and exportation of vehicles into Africa. So he will be giving us a very interesting topic, as well as we are expecting some outlook into what kind of approaches should we use in the continent so that we get vehicles that play the role of growing the economy of the continent. I welcome you, Ravinda Choda, for your presentation. Welcome. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your invite to discuss this. As I said, let me see if I can share my presentation with you. This is going to be a short presentation. It's virtually on the standards. Let me just see if I can pull it up for you. I was going to see if I can, where it's got a share screen. Just bear with me. Desktop one. It's where it's gone. I was hoping I could set the screen to you, but I seem not to be able to. There's a firewall on here.
So if we have your presentation, we could try from this side.
Can I send you the presentation? Maybe much easier for me than there is a firewall here somehow on my system that's not allowing me to. Can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. No. That's why it's good that we are.
Maybe you can send it via chat to my email.
I'll send it. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you via email very, very quickly, so that you'll have it to Philip.
Okay.
Philip Okungu, isn't it?
No, Dan. If you can check on Dan.
Sorry.
I've shared with you via chat. Please send to that via chat.
Okay, just bear with me. Let's. Oh yeah, there we go. Let me open it up and I'll send it to you straight away. Apologies for this, but it's good that we have a pre-chat. Okay, so while it's going on, I'll just talk you through the presentation itself. Really want to talk about is the standards and regulations in the American automotive industry. As you know, this is a important challenge for all over the world, and especially here in Africa. What we want to make sure and understand is that globally speaking, there are many flexible regulatory approaches. For example, the major vehicle safety standards you can talk about are the US FMVSS system and the EU ECE-based systems. So these systems, Dan, have you got the presentation?
Dan, do you have?
Yes, I've received it. I'll be able to share in a few.
Okay, thank you very much. Apologies for this. So as I said, the systems, while Dan's coming on, we'll just go ahead because of the time. Globally speaking, there are two major systems. The systems are the US systems, which is the FMVSS system, and the European-based third-party ECE standards certification. So you have the EU. Both systems are robust, long-standing, and tested. Both have comparable performance. You know, at the UN, we have a system where both are comparable. The ECE standards and the what called the global technical regulations are comparable, both on performance and the outcomes. Of course, as everyone is aware, that standards reduce cost and increase the efficiency. The major benefit of this is it has consumer benefits. The consumer knows what he's getting. You know, the biggest challenge today is the rapid pace of technological change. So modern cars are deceptively high tech. So when a driver gets into a car, he must immediately know how to operate a car that they have never driven before. So this is the whole thing. It has benefits because it brings in everything is the same and how it operates is the same. And this is due to the standardizations. There are two different types of systems. They're the open systems. There we go. Thank you, Dan. You have the open systems. Open systems allow opportunities to investments, and the closed systems reduce the opportunities. Whenever we talk about investments in open systems, could you take to the next, please? So in the US, we talk about the open systems later. We talk about US standards here. The industry standards, everyone is aware of it, that they're developed by peer groups to establish and promote best practices, provide a reliable basis for people to share the same expectations about a product or service. And this is, I refer back to the driver being able to get into any car and being able to operate it without any issue. So this is the whole thing about having the same expectation about a product or a service. Of course, standards facilitate trade, provide a framework for achieving economies, efficiencies, and we go back to the interoperability where you're able to switch from one car to another car without any issues and finding any problems, and enhance consumer production. But standards, as everyone knows, are voluntary, but they may be required in business with a customer. And we talked about earlier on, you know, the earlier presentation was about harmonization of regulations and standards. But this is where it comes down to, is they're all voluntary. But of course, everyone knows that if you call it up in a contract, it becomes a legal document. Next phrase, please. In the US, we're talking particularly for the US, we have the federal legal standards. We have the FMVSS standards. They are particularly to do with safety. You know, federal motor vehicle safety standards, that they are the legal requirements for the production and the sale of motor vehicles and selected components in the United States. They are legal requirements that all vehicles have to meet. There are other non-FMVSS requirements they're related to, but they're not strictly safety performance standards like anti-theft, EDR, events data recorders, bumpers, and there are many other ones. They're non-safety ones, but they may be requirements. So these are two sort of splits. The federal FMVSS are safety-related standards for the US market. Next, please. So how are these standards actually covered in the US? It's the National Highway Traffic Administration, NHTSA for short. They establish the legal requirements. These are the FMVSS standards that we said. There's a long process, and it does take a number of years. They have to go through the legal processes to actually establish an FMVSS. The requirements on the manufacturer has to ensure and declare that the products comply with these regulations. So they are the ones who have the responsibility to ensure that their product that's been sold on the market meets or exceeds the performance requirements set by the NHTSA, by the FMVSS. So how does NHTSA enforce this? You can come into the US market and sell anything you want to, as long as it complies with the regulations. NHTSA will select vehicles from random dealerships. They will test the vehicles and assess validity of the manufacturer declaration. Then NHTSA gathers data on the in-use vehicle safety and conducts investigations. As you rightly remember, the big Dieselgate issue with the VW, and it was NHTSA who actually followed it up. And it was again NHTSA who tested it and found that it wasn't in compliance, and hence the Dieselgate issue started. NHTSA, when it defines it, they can assess it, define it, and they mandate the corrections. But mostly they work with the manufacturers. They give the opportunity for the manufacturer to correct the safety problem. It has a lot to do with the safety. If there is any issue with the safety to the driver, they will go after the manufacturer and work together with the manufacturer to ensure that the issue is corrected. Next, please. Again, earlier on, we talked about manufacturer responsibilities. As an association of car manufacturers, our members have the responsibility and are required to notify car buyers, any owners of a vehicle, car dealers, and the federal government of any defect believed to relate to safety. Again, we bring back this thing, safety, safety, safety is the most important thing. There are early warning systems which are due to the close coordination between manufacturers and NHTSA to address potential safety defects. And in reality, they're required by the law to correct those safety defects. And vast majority of the recalls, as you saw in the VW case, are initiated by the manufacturers. It is actually, they have consultation with NHTSA, they work together with NHTSA, and when such an issue has arisen that cannot be fixed immediately, then the recall is actually initiated by the manufacturers. Manufacturers themselves have a sophisticated systems to monitor the performance in the field, so that they already have knowledge and data they can receive to ensure that this recurring safety issue is not just a local one-off, or is it happening everywhere else? And if they do, then they work together with NHTSA to make sure that they can fix it or have recalls. Next, please. So the general overview of the US system, it puts the burden on ensuring the safety solely on the manufacturers. So manufacturers have to invest in the testing and the certification of certifications and resources. So NHTSA does not have to invest in huge testing and certification resources for every vehicle that's brought onto their market. The system is focused on safety of all vehicles, components in use, including used vehicles, and is not limited to ensuring compliance with established regulations, and not limited to new vehicles or types, but covers all vehicles, as I said earlier, all vehicles sold in the US. Information on safety issues is available to the public. So whenever there is a safety issue in the US, the obligation is of NHTSA to inform the public of these safety issues. They're made sure the whole public is aware of this. And if you go to any internet site from NHTSA, you'll be able to get the information on if there are any safety issues to the vehicle that you're driving. So the US government does not require government approvals to sell the vehicles, what I call the open system. The US requires the vehicles to be safe. FMVSS sets the legal requirements, but does not prohibit vehicles with innovative, unregulated technologies, example, automated drive-in, the new systems coming on to be sold in the market. It does not prohibit, whereas in in the ECE, these systems first have to be regulated and be compliance before they can be sold onto the market. So the US system of the self-certification allows for this innovation. It enables assurance of safety even in the absence of specific regulations. So it means even if you bring a new innovative product, you have to make sure that it is safe to be used before you bring it on the market. You don't have a regulation, but the onus is on the manufacturer to provide the information. Next, please. These are just the simple conclusions. The African markets, they're opening up. There is an issue of, as earlier said, tariffs, which products can be brought in. That used car is, it's been brought in, used cars, and we have issues with used cars in coming into Africa. So there's an open market. The open market leads to trade and increasing number of vehicles in the market, and this leads to market growth, of course. So how do you control that system? You either have a self-certification system, or you can go with third-party certifications where you allow someone has to be certified to come into the market, or you put the onus on the importer or the manufacturer to ensure that their product is safe to be on the road before they can actually sell it. So you're not reducing the innovation, you're opening it markets, so new innovative ideas can come into the market as long as they're safe. And of course, that leads to increasing trade. And this is also important, and that seems to be the main structure of the discussion today, is how do we improve trade? How do we improve trade and investment in the market? With the increase in trade, of course, will come with the investment. If there are more vehicles coming into Africa, I am sure that the manufacturers are much more interested in actually production within the African continent. So hence the investment in the market. So, and just again, I repeat myself again, in the US system, NHTSA does not certify or approve vehicles and equipment, but they test vehicles to assess validity of manufacturer declaration. The onus is on the manufacturer to comply with the safety regs, FMVSS, and other ones, and to make sure that their vehicle is safe to be on the roads in the US. The benefits to the African administrations of the FMVSS process or the self-certification process is that when a vehicle comes into Africa, which is an American vehicle, for example, all the information, the safety information, is readily available from NHTSA. Currently, you can go onto the NHTSA. NHTSA has done all the work of collecting all the data, and if there's any safety issue, you can go into a NHTSA site and find out if there is a vehicle or vehicles, or if NHTSA is already investigating a certain safety information. This is readily available. So it means that you don't have to invest in your own systems or laboratories to assess and approve the vehicles and equipment. So this, in reality, leads to the reduction in investment costs for administration. The onus is again on the manufacturer. The manufacturer has to comply. For the administrations, it's much easier for them to it's better to work with NHTSA to find the information which is readily available, especially if there is a recall issue in the US. This information is readily available, and the administrations can tap into it. So that's my I've taken too long, but I was trying to keep it between 5 and 6 minutes. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ravinda. And I think I'm looking at it as there are two approaches that are used, and that is in the European Union having a system where there has to be a clear certification before the products are put on the market or the motor vehicles are put in the market. And then the US, where there is basically what we call the self-declaration of conformity. Yeah. Self-certification. Manufacturers. And now when you look at it, I don't know whether if you look at it carefully, do you think that's a system that can work in Africa? If it was to work, that self-declaration, like the US approach, if it was to work, what should be in place so that we can take it up? Because if I look at the kind of current approach that we have in Africa is that you have, the government has to establish very big facilities to do the testing. It's like it is the responsibility of the government to make sure that the product or whatever is coming in, and this extends to other sectors, that all these products, the government must make sure that they are safe. In fact, it's like they remove the responsibility from the manufacturer so that the manufacturer can bring anything. So if they are able to just come to the market, then they can come in. If they cause problems, it's upon the government. The government gave them permission to come in. So it's the government to be blamed. So how do you maneuver to ensure that this kind of a system works in Africa?
Well, as I said, both systems are good, but the question here is, what do we want to? I think from a US perspective, US system, the onus is on the manufacturer to make sure, especially with the brand new vehicles, that they are compliant. They are already compliant with the US regulations, and they are safe to be used within the African continent. The onus then is for what they say market surveillance.
Okay.
I think that's the difference between the US. NHTSA undertakes the market surveillance. They take vehicles off the car lot and test them, see if they're in compliance with their declaration. If whatever the manufacturer declares, is it true? And if it's not, then they will go back to the manufacturer. Whereas, as you rightly said, third-party certification is that you have the set of regulations, then someone gets a piece of paper and says, I've got a piece of paper saying that I'm compliant. Then he comes into your market and says, I have a piece of paper that's compliant. So the government is inviting them to come in with a piece of paper, whereas saying that I'm already compliant, whereas from our perspective, the onus is on the manufacturer. So the manufacturer has to make sure his product is compliant. It allows, as I said earlier on, for innovation. For Africa, innovation is important. But, at the moment, the whole global transition virtually here in Europe, in America, is all towards electric vehicles, right? Because that's, as you rightly said, is going towards being environment friendly, but they're developing so quickly. So how would you do that under a third-party certification? Because you'd have to develop regulations for them to comply with before they can bring it into the country. Whereas from an FMVSS process, as long as they're safe, the innovated cars can be brought into the markets. I think if were to, for example, if the vehicles had FMVSS, as I said, there's access to the African governments, the administrations, to work closely with NHTSA or get access to NHTSA, where NHTSA has already done all the work with the testing and the assessing. And if they see faults, and if, for example, there are faults that you see here that can be raised into NHTSA and say, hey, we're finding these cars coming in and we're finding these faults. NHTSA has the capacity and the requirement to go and look at what the faults are and if they can be fixed, and put the onus on the manufacturer. I think that's the benefit of the FMVSS system. And, a lot of the recalls happen in America because of this aftermarket market surveillance and working together with the manufacturers and making sure that the vehicles are safe. Yeah. So I think that's the way forward. Both of them have their places. From an American perspective, it just allows us innovation. It allows us to move fast and work work closely with. You always have to work with the governments and the regulations, but you have to ensure your product is compliant before you bring it into the markets, and not necessarily rely on a third-party certification. And that has its place.
Thank you. That's a very interesting approach, and I think it's something that is worth considering as we move forward towards having industrialization in the continent. And maybe the other question that is related to what you are working on, the working group, informal working group for safer and cleaner used vehicles and new vehicles for Africa, say importation to Africa. In your perspective, do we need a different kind of set of standards that would allow us, because I think the issue is looking at the continent as having a very different kind of economic circumstance that would require a perspective that is clearly suitable for the continent. So what are your views in terms of looking at the kind of vehicles that we could import into the continent?
We're just starting. We're actually meeting next week in Cape Town to get the terms of reference sorted for the informal working group. But this informal working group is actually looking closely at really from a WP29, from a UN, United Nations WP29 perspective of how the current regulations, which have already been published, how these can be used to ensure that the products that have been, the cars that have been imported into Africa meet the requirements. Because we have heard from ARSO and we have heard from ECOWAS and of course from UNEP about the issues of importation of cars, and of course limiting the cars to age is not necessarily also a good idea, because there are some, I live in Switzerland, there are some cars which are 20 years old and have done very little mileage and are very, very good. So you're restricting it. So that this is also of concern, that the concern from the African market, of course, is some of the vehicles that do not meet the requirements in, for example, Europe or in America, and then shipped out as a secondary market. These are the areas of concern as far as, but how do we deal with them? These we have to look within the UN regulations. It shouldn't, as I said, it shouldn't be just based on UNECE. There's a tendency to go, so we'll have, as long as they have a third-party certification, that's okay. But it's also, there are other cars coming from all over the world, and then also the FMVSS of the self-certification also has to be open for it. I think that's the best way for it. It puts the onus on the manufacturers. In this case, it could be the onus on the importers or the exporters who are importing the cars, because we're talking about second-hand vehicles, not brand new vehicles, because the brand new vehicles already the onus is on the manufacturer. The second-hand vehicles, there is a market for it, but the manufacturers are far away from it. So that's why we're looking at see how we can use the United Nations WP29 regulations to set a goal and say, okay, these are the minimum requirements these cars should meet before they're imported into Africa.
Thank you, and I think this is an area that we are also currently very interested in exploring, because I think we came to learn about the informal working group just a few weeks ago, and it raised interest in us to understand what kind of perspectives are being looked into. But I think we should be having some of our people participating.
Yes, Filipiana or something's coming along. Yes, I think so.
Yes. Thank you very much. We shall be coming back to you. Hopefully you will not drop off from the webinar, so that
no, I'll be still on there. And I wanted to thank Dan for actually make sure that he still keeps that presentation there. I don't know why I'm having issues. Apologies.
Thank you very much. So we are moving to the fourth presenter, and the fourth presenter is Dave Coffey. Is the Chief Executive of the African Association of Automotive Manufacturers, the AAAM. He has spent most of his working career in the automotive industry. Graduated in the University of Natal, South Africa, with a BSc in Mechanical Engineering in 1994, and subsequently MBA from University of Cape Town in 1992. Before taking up his position of AFM, he was the Managing Director of Shutterproof, a manufacturer and distributor of automotive glass in South Africa. So he has been active, and I think we have communicated a number of times, and I'm happy with the promotion of the use of standards in the continent for the automotive industry. We welcome you, and you will be giving us your views about fulfilling Africa's vision of large-scale automobile production on the continent, how government and private sector can work together, and strategies which include climate-friendly mobility solutions and the role of the AAM in the development of regional automotive value chains and driving industrialization in Africa. Dave, you are welcome for your presentation.
Thank you, Ruben. Let me just share the screen. You see that, Ruben?
Yes, I can see it. I just make it a presentation mode.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Perfect.
Just want to make two comments up front before I tell you about the journey that we're on.
Yes.
Is that the harmonization of standards across Africa will facilitate scale. That's what we need. And it's very important because it will then be able to motivate investment, bring about process capability, and facilitate intra-Africa and global trade. This is not just about intra-Africa, it's about growing intra-Africa, it's also trading with the world. I also need to highlight that we're on a process of industrialization here. So I hear the used car discussion, the imports need to meet minimum standards, etc. But we're also, our vision for the future, and this is in the medium to long term, is that used cars should actually come from vehicles assembled in Africa. So we create a trade of used cars that meet minimum standards. I mean, as we know, there are used cars coming into Africa that are salvaged, that are written off, come in parts with the car that's written off and get fixed and then aren't checked for any form of roadworthy. So there's a challenge out there right now, which we're all aware of. Our objective is to work with African governments to develop policy and assist them in implementing the policy and ecosystems that will attract global investment and partner locally. So these are our members. They are organizations that contribute to the automotive ecosystem, and it's growing, this membership. It's really good to actually get members from across Africa, and many of you will recognize names here from companies from various African countries. And it's exciting that we're getting momentum, that people believe there's an opportunity in this journey, and believe that with the right policies in place and the ecosystem around it, because policy is not just about an incentive; it's about the whole system of incentives, of trade facilitation, market facilitation, standards, skills development, legislation. It's 9 themes that it brings about a progressive automotive policy. So we believe that there's opportunity for 5 million new vehicles in Africa by 2035. Last year, there was just over 1 million new vehicles sold. I do want to state here that clearly the used car market is a fundamental part of the automotive ecosystem. And you have, for example, South Africa will sell a new car, but it will sell 2.3 used vehicles, and it might vary from country to country. So it's fundamental that they're part of that, because this is about affordable mobility. So in the first step, you will have hub countries developing policies. That's where, around assembly hubs, and not every country will assemble vehicles, it's clear, to get sale. Then that'll move into development of value chains around that hub assembler to support them. Then we see that these communities will actually be trading vehicles and components across Africa, and this will all ultimately come into the free trade area. So the free trade area will provide significant opportunity centered around production and trade. The vehicle manufacturers are very clear as a CEO level that a vehicle should only be produced in one location. It's a completely knocked down. It's the SKD and limited assembly that you do get in place is a transition. It cannot stay. It's light assembly, light employment. But the vehicle industry allows one to progress from light to enhanced to complete knockdown while the demand grows, and that requires intervention. So that's how we see it developing. I do want to share with you the policy development across Africa, because it's exciting that some of the movement that's out there right now. Ghana is going to implement its final outstanding provisions by the end of this year, which includes a ban on vehicles older than 10 years and a duty increase to enable the industrialization. We have 3 OEMs already assembling, vehicles assembling there. There are 3 more will assemble by the end of the year. So clearly industrial policy brings about the investment, and this is at SKD, but there's a plan to deepen that. Ivory Coast, our expert team has just come back from Ivory Coast this morning. They've had 2 missions there. They're developing industrial policy, and that is for both assembly and components. I'll speak a bit more about that just now. Nigeria has had KPMG conducting an independent review. I sat in on the feedback on Monday regarding that. That'll be complete this year. Clearly, the challenge will be to have it approved and implemented because it's been in draft for a while. Egypt has announced a policy in June. It's going through a final parliament approval process very soon here in early mid-November. But a Supreme Council has been formed, and you will see rapid growth in the auto industry in Egypt, in my view. We are visiting Algeria in November. We have a meeting with the Ministry of Industry. There's reform on the go there, and it'll be exciting to see the reception of our discussion. We're going with a employer body association called CAPC. We're very interested to see the feedback we suggest as the framework for our auto policy integrated. Ethiopia, we developed a plan for them, which we put in January after limited consultations. We've had private sector feedback. We're expecting feedback from the government now. So let's hope that moves forward. And then Kenya approved their policy in May. They're going to form an automotive council, which will implement that policy. So you can see this is the hub development taking place. And the key issue is for us to develop the value chains. It's very important. Just to show you what typically we do, we visited Kenya in the first week of October. I just highlight the program. We visited the government, the Manufacturers Association, the Automotive Chapter, assemblers, the component manufacturers, the Bureau of Standards, banks, dealers, just to give the delegation, which you can see on the right there, which was comprehensive, a feeling for the opportunity and how we can actually support the development of the industry in Kenya and in East Africa. We've done this in Ghana 5 times. We've been to Egypt. We're getting to understand the needs, and we'd like to introduce existing manufacturers to local companies, show them the capability, and drive partnerships and linkages across Africa. This was mentioned in a prior presentation. There's been a continental auto strategy drafted by our policy team and had extensive inputs from the Secretariat, the AU, ARSO, UNECA, Afrexim Bank, and MMM, and it's been circulated to all African member states. So we look forward to the feedback. It's been called an automotive package because it shares an integrated automotive plan for Africa. This is very important because it's so key to get inclusivity on the way in this journey. We must take the hub assemblers, we must take the regions that can actually manufacture components or transform minerals, which is a big opportunity along in this journey, because that's the way we'll really get strong production and trade across Africa. So my last slide, I want to focus more about components. It's very important from a vehicle's perspective, what we've already covered with minimum standards and homologation requirements. But it's so important to develop the regional value chains. And some countries are very underdeveloped in this area. And it's key to understand who has what competitive and sustainable advantage. And there's been some good research done in the ECOWAS region supported by Afrexim Bank to understand what can be manufactured and what with investment can actually meet the right OEM requirements. So we've got to develop the manufacturing base in Africa to develop the skills. The time is right now in countries like Ghana, who are developing the assembly industry now, is to actually focus on component manufacturing skills. Let's get the base up so that we get tier 2 and tier 3 supporting the tier 1's existing component manufacturers. And also there's an opportunity to actually work and develop workshop technicians There's a lot of, this is a big informal sector. How do we formalize the sector and bring it up to a level which actually is facilitates investment and taking the industry to a different level? Transformation of raw materials, this is a huge opportunity. Africa is rich in minerals that are required for these new energy vehicles. How do we actually transform, add value, and then obviously support the likes of battery manufacture or manufacture batteries? A big opportunity, manganese, lithium, nickel, etc. in Africa. But where low volume semi-knockdown assembly exists, there's little opportunity for component manufacturing to supply those vehicles at an OEM level. However, there's a big opportunity to manufacture spare parts. And that is significant. And that's where we are focusing in countries that are new and in the regions. I've seen this in countries where there can be more than 60% of the spare parts are used parts. There's a risk here is that if we do not actually get the standard of these parts right, as it's correctly said, in safety critical parts, etc., you won't get the component manufacturers coming in to invest in those products because their investment will be at risk. Sure, they could come in and supply OE, but it's important for us to actually get manufacturing going in the aftermarket parts, which can transition to OE as the volumes pick up. So I'm also very aware that when we develop and adopt the relevant standards where they are lacking, that there's going to be a backlash because there's a broad stakeholder base that's involved in the, for example, all the spare parts industry today. We need to do this properly. We need to involve, it's the same as used car imports, which is a big resistance factor there in terms of introducing policy. One needs to actually manage that and have strong stakeholder engagement and explain why it's important. Also important to have the standards authority given the legislative authority to carry out the surveillance, to check that, you spoke about the manufacturers declaring that it meets standards to do tests on that or to verify the documentation, etc. It's very important. And we are now in Ghana developing a component manufacturing policy in Ivory Coast. It's actually part of the policy development for assembly. But with this, it's very important. We believe that you should combine this actually because its standards are fundamental to both. And in the auto strategy document for the continent, the standardization of or the harmonization of standards across the continent is actually fundamental. So we really are driving hard now to get component manufacturing going. And I've just highlighted some of the challenges, but we know what we need to do to get people in. There's massive opportunity, and also in component manufacturing, the ratio of jobs for component manufacturers is 3 to 4 times that of assembly on vehicles. So we're on a path, and we're making progress. You can hear that from the policy development, but it requires deliberate intervention. It requires people that are willing, both in government and in private sector, to drive this journey. And we've got really good partners in this. We've got private sector, which I've shared with you. We've got the AU and the Secretariat and ARSO and the contributors to the continental strategy. And we have the bank. We have an Afrexim Bank, a very, very important part of from a financing perspective. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. And a wonderful kind of journey that I think you've embarked on in terms of raising the profiles of the industry. But one question that I think is of interest is that when you look at the policy frameworks for the automotive industry, it's like they have come quite late. I don't know, what is the reason that they have just come recently, despite the fact that all of us, I believe, we know that the sector is very important. Why are they coming so late in time?
So if you look at the AAAM, it was only founded in 2015. Okay, so you now have a gathering of OEMs and component manufacturers that are engaging governments more recently about the opportunity of industrialization and job creation. So it's only recent real momentum that's got at a continental level, and having the AU mandate, this strategy to be the sector to be industrialized. So I think that there's just a gathering more recently of the right players in the public and private sector to drive this. It's just it's nothing else other than that. The car companies have been working, I know, since 2011 or 12 with Nigeria to try and develop policy. But that was less, that was a focus on Nigeria. And why? Because they got 200 million people, and they thought, okay, this is the biggest opportunity. But this is taking a different dimension now. This is the opportunity from a continental perspective and the opportunity it creates for Africa.
Yeah, thank you for that. And from your perspective, because you mentioned this very clearly, that the manufacture of components presents itself a big opportunity rather than looking at the key parts like engines and all that. What are the prospects when you look at the technologies? For example, these where you are just looking at replacement parts, talk of bolts, nuts, springs, exhaust systems for the current technologies. What are the prospects of us having those manufactured in the continent and of course forming part of the value chain?
And the manufacture of components is driven by scale, as is the complete knockdown of vehicles. So we need to get the volumes up, and that's why the AFCFTA offers the opportunity. But if we just look at, we need to align who can do what best, because you look at policy development of neighbors in Africa. At the moment, you have Ghana and you've got Ivory Coast both developing a policy. The ideal situation is for them to complement each other and other countries around that, so that they don't all do that. They don't do the same thing. So going back to what can they make? We could ICE engines are going to phase out. So that's not a good example to say that technology, there'll be new engine plants in Africa. That I don't believe that's going to happen. Yeah, but we're going to participate in the powertrain journey, right, on new energy vehicles. We are well endowed with minerals that are required for new energy vehicles. So maybe we don't have to make the battery, but we'll make components of that battery and actually contribute significantly to the GDP of Africa in that value chain. So we need to find our role. And but just general parts. I can't be specific. If the scale is there, we can make the parts. But also just to consider that. So we are driving for a rule of origin of 40%. You've got certain countries are driving 60, but you've got to find a balance between those new entrants and those who are industrialized. And that's what's important, is to find that balance. But you'll always have a percentage imported into countries and the continent. Okay. And you may have one OEM importing a certain component while the other one actually makes it locally because of their production and trade strategy on the continent. You ideally would like to get alignment, but you can't tell them all what to do, So the more you get aligned in terms of products, and that's where Africa offers an opportunity. Today, there might be components which are imported into South Africa or Morocco. But when you start combining the assembly volumes across the continent, you might be able to localize that in Africa. So scale is the real issue and advantage for where we are heading to the largest single market. And that's why this harmonization of standards is very important and a big opportunity for the continent.
Thank you very much, Dave. That's a great hope for the continent, and I think there's a bright future for it. If we are able to play our cards well, harmonize the standards, specialize, and pool resources so that we can achieve economies of scale. Thank you very much. We look forward to the last remarks in a short while. So let me welcome the bank, Dr. Inmo Sanami. So very supportive. I think this is one of the most supportive banks in terms of the automotive industry. They started with the issues of harmonization of standards, and I think it's something that we need to appreciate, that they have kept the momentum going. So he's going to present on African industrialization, the case of an African automotive industry's opportunities and potentials and challenges for the industry, and why promoting access to affordable financing options remain essential. So again, Mosanami is currently a senior manager for the Intra-African Trade Initiative at the Afrexim Bank. He's responsible for trade facilitation with 16 years of experience on trade and industrialization matters. Has been working on a number of trade facilitation initiatives, including the FCFTA Adjustment Facility, Transit Grantee Scheme, Intra-African Trade Fair, Automotive Strategy, Export Trading Companies, Trade Carrying Infrastructure, Payments and Settlement Systems, etc., to promote intra-African trade. He was the Regional Trade Advisor, Commonwealth Secretariat, SADC Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, and the Federated States of Micronesia, focusing on industrialization, private sector development, export, investment promotion, trade facilitation, trade negotiations, trade and industrialization policy frameworks, and advocacy. I will not go through all your profile, Dr. Sanamwi, but to emphasize that today we are here to hear what are the prospects for the bank to support the industrialization aspects, particularly in the automotive industry, as you indicate and as you initiated as a key mover of industrialization in the continent. Welcome, Dr. Sanamwi.
Yes, thank you very much, Ruben. And all right, let me see if I can share my screen. Yes, it's allowing me. All right, thank you very much. I think this is a very interesting discussion. I've listened to all the key speakers who are highlighting the importance of the automotive industry. From Afreximbank, we believe that this is actually time for Africa to focus on developing a viable automotive industry using the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We believe that the AFCFTA is a real game changer, and we mean it in the true sense of the word, because if you look at what the AFCFTA has done, it has now allowed Africa to be united, to create a single market. And this is very important for us to actually have the scale that Dave was talking about. We really need to actually now work together as Africa, use our resources, and focus on industrializing the continent. And the only place that you can probably start with in this context is the automotive sector. There's already something that is going on, and this is why Afreximbank thought that we actually need to use the automotive sector as a key industry that will then serve as a model for the other sectors. What we are doing in the automotive industry, we believe, could then be replicated in other sectors, textiles, pharmaceuticals, steel, and etc. But let me briefly share with you what we are doing under the Afreximbank automotive strategy. We basically simplified all these things that we've been discussing into three key pillars. And at the center of our strategy is the development of regional automotive value chains. And we believe that for that to happen, you really need to have policies, and you also need to build capacity at the national level. But all these things will not work without financing. So that is why our third pillar is looking at how we can actually provide cheap and affordable financing, especially to the component manufacturers and some assemblers. The OEMs normally don't have a major challenge in terms of accessing finance. They can easily access funding from their headquarters. But we also come in as Afreximbank to provide guarantees, because we believe that we understand the African risk probably better than any other entities within the continent. And why do we focus on regional value chains? I think we know that it's not possible or feasible nor desirable for each and every African country to do an SKD or CKD plant. We really need to focus on the development of regional value chains, as Dave highlighted, and the bank has actually made the development of regional or continental value chains the anchor of our strategy. And we were inspired a little bit by the Airbus example. And if we basically are united, we can actually forge ahead and create the single market in the automotive sector that we want. But if we are divided, it will not fly. And it's basically the logic of developing regional value chains. We've been working with AAM to actually do a pilot study in the ECOWAS region on regional value chain studies. And we actually finalizing that study. Today, we actually had a session with the ECOWAS experts, private sector. They are actually considering this study. It was approved by the national experts from government a few weeks back. So we'll now use this ECOWAS pilot study to now do a continental study on the automotive regional value chains, looking at who in the continent is best at producing which parts. I think, Ruben, you talked about the spare parts. Dave was also talking about the possibility of doing more in the after sales. This is exactly what this regional value chain study is going to help us. Is Egypt going to probably be good in producing which components? What about probably Ghana? What about Zambia? So these are some of the things that we are looking at, and we need to map what each country at the continental level is able to do, and then we see how best we can support those countries so that at the end of the day, under the AfCFTA, all the countries will feel like they have something to gain. And not all of them may be able to do a CKD or a SKD assembly, but they may benefit from the regional value chains. Just to give you a practical example of what we are doing in DRC and Zambia, we know that electric vehicles are going to play a key role. They are already playing a role, and this is going to increase in the immediate future. And we need to now start positioning ourselves to also tap into that sector of the electric vehicles. And we can start by producing the raw materials and components that are needed in the electric vehicle value chain. So we've started in DRC by looking at the possibility of putting a battery precursor plant. And it's something that can actually be done with about 40 million, 50 million US dollars. You can actually put a sizable plant. We did the analysis, and it can actually be more competitive than China, US, or Poland. And we also noted that DRC has got all the key minerals that we need for this precursor plant. The lithium, they have the copper, they have, we can get manganese and nickel from other neighboring countries. DRC also has these minerals. So we are now looking at what is it that we can do more actually in terms of using these green minerals, so to speak, to facilitate sustainable development of the automotive industry. We are now also extending the project to Zambia. These are some of the things that we are doing. Then coming to finance, some of you may be already aware that the bank has now put $1 billion under our African Global Automotive Financing Facility to support the component suppliers, the key players in the auto value chain with financing, especially distributors, and ensure that they've got access to financing. We are doing a study where we are now trying to identify innovative financing products that will enable us to be able to respond, especially to the needs of the some of the small players in the component manufacturing sector. That study will be finalized before the end of this year, and it will also give us some clarity on what is it that we can do working with the local financial institutions to provide cheap and affordable financing to the automotive sector. And we've been working with AAM and other players to also provide some insights on what is it that is required by the industry, especially some of the small players. For the small players, we may not be able to support them directly at the moment, but we are also working with a range of local financial institutions that may come to the bank and get a credit line, which they can then on-lend to the automotive, to the small automotive players, particularly the component manufacturers. And also on the policy and capacity building, as Dave highlighted, we are working with AAAM and the FTA Secretariat to develop a continental automotive strategy. We believe that this is going to be very key in terms of unlocking the development of the automotive industry. It will actually allow us to create that scale that we need. And we also have been supporting the development of automotive policies at the national level. We have provided finance, for example, to Nigeria to develop its automotive policy. We are now looking at other countries that have submitted requests to the bank. We'll continue working on this in collaboration with AAAM. I will not go through these in detail due to time constraints, but I just want to highlight that in addition to what I've highlighted, the 1 billion, we have got a range of financing instruments that we use to support the automotive industry. We have an initiative on developing industrial parks and also auto parks. And we have been working also with ARSO on harmonization of standards, as you have heard, those 41 auto standards, and also our collaboration with ARSO, unlocked funding from PTB, which is also another partner we've been working with. We are working with AAAM also on the Intra-African Trade Fair, which will be taking place in Cote d'Ivoire. That's the 3rd edition from 21 to 27 November next year. And we will also be having an Africa Auto Show, whereby we'll be discussing all the topical issues relating to the automotive industry. We will be looking at the B2B, B2G, and all the practical things that we really need to do to support the automotive industry. And these are the other finance products that we have. I'll not go through them in detail, but I just want to also highlight that we are also looking at how best to support the industry. Some of the interventions that we have include the project preparation facility, which can help countries to also develop their project to bankability. And we also have the Fund for Export Development in Africa, FEDA, which provide equity patient capital. And these are some of the things that we are doing at Afreximbank. And we look forward to continuing the collaboration with ARSO, AAAM, FCFTA Secretariat, AU, to ensure that Africa basically develops a viable automotive industry that will create jobs for our young population and ensure that the continent is transformed. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Sanamu. And you know, the comprehensive coverage that you have given in terms of the financing perspectives, which will encourage the continent to have the regional value chains. And I think this is one of the aspects that has been really, you know, making a long time, such that, you know, find that countries are using their small scales, you know, trying to ensure that they can be self-sufficient in terms of, you know, manufacturing a whole vehicle using their own means. And that is something that has bogged us down. And examples of the, you know, collaboration among countries to ensure that we can manufacture several, you know, several parts that go into making the whole system work. So in your view and in your discussions with all these countries, have you seen kind of acceptance that countries can participate in the value chains, that they can specialize in certain parts rather than manufacturing the whole vehicle within their own territories? Have you seen a willingness in that perspective?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. I think countries are beginning now to understand that it's not really a question of trying to have the whole cake. So I think that message through the engagements that we've been having through the AFCFTA Council of Trade Ministers and some of the engagements that we've been having at the national level and also through the Intra-African Trade Fair, the countries are beginning to actually warm up to the idea that you can actually extract some value from the automotive industry by identifying a niche. For example, a number of countries are now beginning to do some soul searching to say, what are we really good at? What components can we really get into? And this is where the studies we are doing on the regional value chains is actually going to help, because we will map out what is happening in an entire region, and then we will do it at the continental level. That will show countries what are some of the areas that they are strong in. What is it that they should actually focus on? So if you are Zambia, you know you've got lithium, you've got copper, you can actually try to position yourself to do something for the electric vehicle, or the example that I gave for DRC to start doing something for the precursor. And if you are Liberia, maybe what is it that you can do with your rubber? So these are some of the things that are beginning to emerge as a result of some of the discussions that we are doing. But immediately, what then becomes a challenge is how do they access financing to be able to finance those small projects? This is where now the bank comes in, because if it's not done as a package, if you don't look at the policy changes, if you don't look at the identification of competitive advantage and the finance package together, some of these things will never take place. In certain instances, you need that interventionist approach to support even the development of auto parks in countries to produce certain components. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And the other question that arises, now that you're looking at exploiting the minerals, which are very sensitive in the supply chain, global supply chain, they're not basically local. And you find that these are minerals classified in some of the countries, of course, the EU, the USA, as critical materials that the value chains must be secured. Are you foreseeing a situation where we shall be having some clashes with our external development partners in terms of, you're exploiting these minerals, perhaps disrupting their value chains?
Well, I mean, as you know, the automotive sector is a very complicated sector. It's basically a production and trade system, and there are so many forces that govern this. So there's now when one looks at the issue of electric vehicles and the key minerals, we basically call them in quotes green minerals or green metals that we have. Many players want this. We've been having discussions with a number of developed countries. We will not name them to protect the guilty and also the innocent, but there's an interest in having access to those raw materials. But our message has been, yes, we understand we want to be part of the production and trade system, but for us, our narrative has been very simple. We also want to contribute to climate change reduction. We want to contribute to globalization. We believe that we can actually partner with the developed countries in doing the production in Africa. So we are calling upon all the developed countries to actually localize production in Africa. And if we do that, we'll achieve two twin objectives. Number one, industrializing the continent. Number two, we actually cut CO2 emissions. Why am I saying that? We've seen truckloads taking essentially soil and across to Asia, Europe, and elsewhere. They process that dirt or soil, as we call it, and then they send the products back. The emissions that are actually produced in that process, in those wasteful journeys, is almost about 3% of the global CO2 emissions. So we're actually saying that by localizing and processing those green metals in Africa, we as Africa can actually contribute to a significant reduction of CO2 emissions. So the full story that we are actually trying to tell as part of our narrative is that let's actually partner in the production of vehicles within the continent. And most of these things can actually be done with the continent, and we can actually collaborate with these developed countries and ensure that there's a win-win. And that will also help us to reduce some of the challenges that our partners like EU have with our young people who are dying trying to cross the Mediterranean. If we create these jobs in Africa, we'll be also solving that problem. So that's basically our main message, to try and have a collaborative approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think that's a very convincing message. Now that we have you as our last speaker, I think I would like to turn the tables around and be the first person to give you your last word on, this perspective, the automotive industry, your perception of the future, how you see it, the vision that we have towards the end of it. Your last word on it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think with the partnership that we have embarked on with the AAAM, the AFCFTA Secretariat, AU, and ARSO, I believe that the continent is now ready to develop a viable automotive industry. Some of the things that we are working on, like the continental automotive strategy, the regional value chains, and the finance that we are providing, I think we have got all the resources that we need to develop the industry. We are going to create a viable automotive policy environment, and I don't see anything that will stop us from actually developing a viable automotive industry for the AFCFTA as well as for the global market. I think this is basically our vision. The African continent is now ready for industrialization and the development of the automotive industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanamwe. And we take from you that the time is now that we can have a viable automotive industry with collaboration with the private sector, with financing, and the creating the relevant value chains. Thank you very much. Dev, I come to you. AAAM, a very interesting journey that you started, concerted effort, and I think something that gives us hope. What is your last word on this?
I echo what Gaynor said. We have the right partnerships now to make a real difference, but we also have pragmatic governments. I'm hearing the conversation is, so what is our niche? That's different to what can I assemble? And that's very important, is that I'm seeing more and more and hearing it. And we've gone to the other economies I haven't spoken about. We've had trips to Gabon, to Rwanda, to Cameroon, asking that question. That's very important, that if people say, please come and look, we'll go, because we really want to try and find the niche of these countries. So I believe that the time for Africa is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Every country looking forward to having a role to play to make it a success. Ravinda, if you look at Africa, you've seen the role of the automotive industry in the USA. What can you tell us about the future that you see for Africa? Do we have Ravinda on?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. The future of I can see is getting from a standards perspective, getting an agreement on as to what is actually required. There is, as I said before, I go back to my presentation. Generally, in the world, there are two systems available: the self-certification and the third-party certification systems. The question the nations have to ask themselves, and we talk about developing building spare parts and making auto vehicles within Africa. How do we comply? What do we really need to do? Do we want innovation? Do we really want to carry on relying on second-hand vehicles? From what I'm hearing from today's presenters, all of them, the future is actually looking at how do we develop the automotive industry locally, and that's a positive side. From a standards perspective, I come from the US-based FMVSS. I think that's an important one for compliance, to make sure that manufacturers are able to bring their products to the market very quickly and still compliant with the local regulation. The issue that raises is for the local administrations. I understand currently from the third-party certification issues, I hear from some people that there is this really slow in getting certifications of compliance for the third party before they can bring it to the market. I see the FMVSS process a very open process, which will allow more vehicles, more onto the markets, putting the onus onto the manufacturers. But if these vehicles are already there from the US markets, for example, administrations already have access to all the information they need to, for example, NHTSA. But what we're going to have to do is the administrations are going to have to work on market surveillance and the correct market surveillance to ensure that the products are compliant. So this doesn't stop the manufacturer bringing the product into the market, but ensuring that the product that's in the market is as what the manufacturer declared it to be. So that's a different onus, whereas the third-party certification, the onus is on actually manufacturer complying with it and having a certificate, and then it's much easier, of course, that you say that you're going to have to do. Someone shows you a piece of paper to the administrators and say, I'm compliant in Europe, I can bring it in. If you're developing vehicles in Africa, then you're going to have to set up laboratories and all the testing facilities to ensure that third-party certification. Whereas if we get the manufacturer to commit to making that product, the vehicle, compliant and allowing him to go on the market, and then relying on market surveillance, and of course, just like NHTSA, holding the manufacturer to the right, to making sure that if there are defaults, they're able to fix them. If they're not, then the recall is going through. This is the issue that the administrator is going to have to comply with. It's very easy to take regulations from countries because currently third certification is much easier because you have a piece of paper, but in reality, it doesn't solve the problem. From our perspective, manufacturers should be able to come into the market. Both systems are the same, but for the African countries, I think the issue is going to be the investments. We had a gentleman, Dr. Ganmore from Africa Bank. They're going to have to invest in these laboratories, train the people to apply those regulations strictly and test them to those. I think those are the challenges, how I see them.
Thank you very much, Ravin. And I think I'm getting from you, we need a innovation, a regulatory and administrative system that encourages quick, placing of products into the market, but with the owners being on the manufacturers to ensure that the vehicles are safe, so that it encourages, shortens the time for certification.
It is, and also, ARSO are doing very well is to ensure that there is no need to reinvent the wheel, because a lot of the regulations are already been written. They're all equivalent regulations. Is how you implement them. You have the ECE, you have the FMVSS, you have the UN GTRs. These are all regulations that are already been written. The question is how you implement it into the African continent, because these regulations are global, are available, and if the administrators are listening in, we encourage people to sign up to the UN 1998 agreement, because that's the global technical regulations with the word global, whereas the ECE is very EU-based, European-based. So it's very important that the GTR would encompass virtually all large manufacturers around the world. So it's something to look at.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Those are the approaches we shall be looking at. I think our regulators are listening. We will be engaging with them. Anya, let's come to you. You give us, you gave us challenges of, us wanting to exploit the potential, but kind of having our hands tied behind our backs. So to say, you didn't say it that way, but I think kind of that's a challenge we have. So what is your last word on us moving forward? What do you see that will unleash us to move forward in investing in the automotive industry?
Yeah, so let me maybe summarize the two essential challenges we want to tackle and we can tackle, as has come out in the various presentations. I mean, the one side is addressing the trade barriers, tariff and non-tariff barriers, where UNCTAD is also active across sectors, so also to promote industrialization in general. And I mean, there are several projects such as Enhanced Integrated Framework, where we look at how can logistics and trade be more efficient. And then on the productive capacity side, I think there I really want to highlight also the AFCFTA and the potential of the AFCFTA we have, and also harmonizing investment and competition policies, and also potentially having a kind of regionally coordinated, harmonized industrial policies. Because what has been mentioned, and this is what I want to emphasize, where we at UNCTAD are also working on, is for African countries to find their niches in certain areas in production, and this comes across industrialization and manufacturing sectors. And there, what we also want to highlight, and where UNCTAD is also supporting the negotiations on investment protocol and also assisting African countries to revise their investment policies to see how the investment policies can attract investment in the sectors where they're needed, but also keep in mind the aspect of sustainability, and where we also think it's important that we kind of avoid a race to the bottom when we attract investments across the continent, but then also have kind of a reduction of taxes in some ways. And I think there's a large potential, what has been emphasized, where we can tackle through partnerships for coordinated policies, these kind of missing linkages across the continent, because there are plenty of resources. And when we provide the information, also the information to enterprises, where are inputs located, which other countries have this kind of facility or have the potential to provide these inputs, then we can build the production networks. And something we also highlight is at UNCTAD, where we work on is trade and services, because the services sector is an essential element to combine the linkages and also to provide finances. And we're currently also looking on partnering with several organizations to look at innovative financing solutions and how African countries can leverage financial technologies, for instance, to also promote industrialization. So there are plenty of avenues that we can, or African countries can jump on, and where also UNCTAD is active to support, but I think I also stop here, and thanks again for listening to all the presentations, and it has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much for your inputs, and I think encouragements on how we can move forward. I think looking at the kind of avenues existing that we can utilize, and it's important that we look at all the possibilities and create systems that can really make sure that our countries can create the kind of trust among themselves that then enables them to utilize the local resources that are available to industrialize. I thank you very much for that. I encourage all the participants, those who have questions, kindly just ensure that you are posting them in the chat, and we shall collect them and actually respond to your questions either through the ARSO Secretariat or through emails. Thank you, Maria. I've seen your input and a question, and I think these are questions we shall be looking at, sending to Dr. Saname to answer. So we may not answer it right now, but I'm sure that we will get the answer to you after the webinar. Nadine, you are the last one. You can give us an insight on what are the visions, your last take on this. What are your visions for the standardization and conformity assessment?
Thank you very much, TG. I have seen that all of us are pointing out a challenge that is almost common in Africa. For me, I can say that we have challenges of scattered efforts when it comes to standard harmonization. And I think that working together and also increased cooperation among the all relevant stakeholders, it will be like a weapon to fight issues of manufacturing level. And also we can urge the stakeholders such as industry, government, partners, regs and member states to be channeling their standardization project through ARSO, because ARSO and AFSEC are the sole institutions that have a mandate to harmonize standards for Africa. And we can also call upon the industry players in the automotive sector to be part of the standard harmonization process by providing their views and to enrich the technical content of the standards. This can be during the national consultation and also during the public review stage, where they can be cooperating with national standard bodies to channel their comments to ARSO. Thank you. I think this is what I have to say.
Yeah, thank you very much, all the panelists, and thank you all the participants. Just to let you know that the last webinar for the year will be on 30th November. It will be on the Sustainable Development Goals and standardization. So that we cover some of the topics. It will be interesting to see what are the issues that are covered. We shall be having our 67th Council meeting in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, hosted by the government of Ethiopia. And next year, as indicated, we shall be having our General Assembly in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, hosted by the government of the DRC. So we welcome you to those who have interest in any of the topics that will fit into the themes that we've set. You are welcome to send in your interest in presenting. There's no charge. It will be an opportunity for you to showcase some of the things that you're involved in. I thank all those who have sent the questions, those who have, commented. You will get all since you registered, you'll be getting all the presentations from our panelists so that you can make references to them, as well as follow up on the activities that they're involved in. I thank you very much and look forward to meeting you again online in our webinar on 30th November this year. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much.